Back with the very tail end of our logical fallacies or rhetorical fallacies, same thing. So just to reiterate, we are going to be using these to analyze a couple different texts and to identify specifically rhetorical fallacies when used to create an other out of somebody who's different. We're going to do it from two different ways. One, we're just looking at race, but towards the end of the semester, we're going to open it up into other kinds of bias, implicit bias. And on Thursday, we're going to talk a little bit about what our next assignment is and get back into the flow of having DEJs and stuff like that. So we were looking, there were 4 different sets of these rhetorical fallacies, these flaws in logic that could either distract people or they're incomplete or you sort of miss something in the middle. It's missing some of that syllogism that matches up. And there's some that are, that just like don't make sense. So we already looked at the distractions and the misconnections. And so we're going to look at the bad ethos and the mean ones, the very mean ones. And these ones will be super helpful for you guys when you start analyzing arguments. So I've been really enjoying reading through some of the found artifacts of rhetoric that you posted in last Thursday's classroom writing lab post, and I need to sift through the rest of them. So let's go through. For bad ethos, the very obvious one is just appeal to authority. It's kind of like at the beginning of our talk about rhetoric, where there were those arguments that were just pure ethos, the like, oh, mom said, or, you need to clean your room because I said so, or the God has really put it on my heart that we should break up, where it's like you are not giving any evidence whatsoever. You're just using authority as a means to make an argument. And that's bad. Even if that person has the authority, if there's no reason behind it, if there's no evidence behind it, then it is not a good argument. And again, there's a difference between a good argument and an effective argument. Appeal to authority works a lot. So one of the best examples, before we really understood what cigarettes did to our lungs and our throats and our tongues and our mouths, doctors would recommend it. And so there was no reason why you should smoke it other than, look, a doctor says you can, and we trust doctors completely with things related to our health, so therefore they must be good for us. Or more recently,
has the authority to, which is very powerful.
Let me go back.
The president.
This was last, I think, Wednesday is when this happened. And I swear I'm not going to show like too many of the coronavirus briefings. I know I'm probably the only one who enjoys watching them. And again, if you're offended by my use of Trump in this context, I am just calling them like I sees them. And I'm not making any sort of moral, objection. This is purely rhetorical, that these are objectively not good arguments. So the battle between the states versus the federal government keeps waging on. I'm sure you've at least noticed something in the ether of Twitter or whatever of states wanting to not reopen and federal government wanting to reopen. Anyways, this is in regards to that question. And I forget the exact question that came before this, but something like, but states do have the authority to do this on their own, so why should they listen to the federal government? Something along those lines.
Chief, there's a debate over what authority you have to order the country reopened. What authority do you have?
Well, I have the ultimate authority. The President of the United States has the authority to do what the President has the authority to do, which is very powerful. The President of the United States calls the shots. If we weren't here for the states, you would have had a problem in this country like you've never seen before.
You said when someone is president of the United States, their authority is total. That is not true.
Okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to write up papers on this. It's not going to be necessary because the governors need us one way or the other, because ultimately It comes with the federal government. That being said, we're getting along very well with the governors, and I feel very certain that there won't be a problem. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Has any governor agreed that you have the authority to decide when their state
I haven't
opens
asked
back up?
anybody, because I don't, you know why? Because I don't have to. Go ahead, please.
But who told you?
Okay, we'll stop there. So, obvious absence of any kind of substantial argument, not citing the specific ways that he might have authority over the states. It's a super complicated process, and it could have easily turned into a poli-sci lesson, but it didn't. It was just continuously emphasizing, nope, I have the ultimate authority, and then evading it in lots of different ways. Appeal to age is trusting someone or some idea because it's older and therefore it's wiser. So you guys all have experience with this in some way. This is a way in which the youth are not privileged. I think youth are privileged in a lot of ways, but in this way they're not. I'm sure you've had the experience where you believe that you are in the right, but it doesn't matter because you're talking to somebody older or has a more authority over you. And just because you're younger, you're not trusted. I certainly deal with that in a profession which favors people who are older and more typically male. People think I'm a student all the time, but my opinion, it doesn't seem to be as valid in certain occasions because of that. So this came up a lot last year. Greta Thunberg was in the news more and more. People were just taken by her age, and they kept talking about her parents. What kind of parents would let their daughter do something like this? Oh, her mind just hasn't been formed yet. She's reacting extremely to this. So nobody trusted that she'd done her research, that she actually was educated in what she was talking about, and she just happened to have this gift of passion. And it was purely because of her age. If she was in her 30s or 40s, I don't think that would have been an issue. Appeal to tradition, very similar to appeal to age, but just arguing that we should do something because it's the way that it always has been done. So this has been used historically for really bad stuff like slavery, of like, well, there's always been slaves in this family, so like we've always done it that way. Like, how could it be bad if we've always had slaves? Which of course is not a correct statement in the first place. But it's used these get really dangerous when you're looking at the past to dictate what should be done presently. So we do this a lot with medicine, people going back to homeopathic stuff of just because your grandma's did something, it doesn't necessarily mean that thing is better than, let's say, a newer medical procedure. And we could also call in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, these things that we cite, especially the Constitution, of like, look, this thing is constitutional law. We have to go back to the Constitution. Well, the Constitution was written a really long time ago, and it was written in a specific context, and it was written really vaguely. And so it gets pretty nasty when people are arguing the language or saying, well, just because it's in the Constitution, that thing is then right. We had the 13th Amendment, which is has been been very loosely interpreted to allow enslavement of people. So it gets messy. False authority is using, obviously, evidence from somebody who's not connected with the issue whatsoever. This is coming up a lot with a lot of TV doctors, Dr. Oz especially, Dr. Phil, Dr. Drew, going on Fox News specifically, giving advice about coronavirus. And none of them have the authority to do that whatsoever. Out of the three of them, Dr. Oz is the only one with any like real medical experience. And even he is like a complete nut job when it comes to his prescriptions or the way that he thinks people should solve their medical problems. It's very based off of miracle drugs, get thin quick, or, get your hair back quick, things like that. But it's dangerous if you keep having these people with the term doctor, with the title of doctor in front of their names. They can easily lead people astray. Anecdotal, I don't have an example for this, but anytime you just use personal experience or an isolated example instead of a sound argument. So I mentioned a couple weeks ago or last week, all the time runs together, about how my dad was citing people that he knew who were not wearing masks and who were still going out in public. It's like, all right, great. Like that's you give an example of some people that is by no means authoritative. So we know that anecdotes are really helpful when we're making arguments, but not when they're not when they're like the evidence or the evidence for the claim themselves. It can be really emotionally powerful to bring in anecdotes, but it's not going to solve something right away. It's not going to prove something definitively. Appealing to heaven is a very fun one. So asserting that God has ordered, supports, or approves one's standpoint or action, so no further justification is required. So this is the same as that God put it on my heart that we should break up situation, because you just can't argue with it, but there's no reason for it. There's no reasoning that you can show. And that does get kind of messy, especially as I mentioned when we first went over that ethos example. Everybody's relationship spiritually is very personal, and what's very real to you may not seem real to somebody else. And unless you are speaking to somebody who has the same worldview, it's just not going to work. And it isn't something that should offend you that they're like, I'm sorry, that's not good evidence. It's just you're talking to somebody with a totally different worldview. So the classic turn to Jesus or burn in hell, or repent or die kind of messaging, the Westboro Baptist Church style of converting people, is, I think, the most ridiculous and I think destructive thing that the Christian church is doing. That's not going to get anybody to convert, or maybe if they do, but it's completely based off fear. That's a conversation for another time. More recently, even bringing in religion into a situation where it doesn't totally belong. So one of the most charming coronavirus briefings was when the president brought on all these various CEOs to talk about how they're now making masks with their facilities, which is a great thing. And this guy was the CEO of My Pillow. He had the mic for a long time, a weirdly long time for a guy who works for My Pillow that just makes big pillows. And he went on this, I don't want to say rant, but it was off script, about sort of insinuating that coronavirus had struck us because of these reasons, that God's been taken out of our schools, that it's now time, we should be reading our Bible. We turned our back to God. And it was incredibly awkward for everybody, clearly including the president, who was doing his best to not betray that this wasn't the plan. But this would be an appeal to heaven. It wasn't appropriate to say, and there's no way that he can back that up. And it really diminishes credibility too. And this is where the terms right and wrong are very problematic. We just can't use them because we live in a morally relativistic society. If we are all in the same subscribe to the same worldview, let's say if you if you are practicing Muslim, when you are speaking with other practicing Muslims, when you say something is right or wrong, you can assume that their sense of right and wrong is pretty similar because you share a fixed worldview. But when you go outside of that, that's why people arguing from different religions gets messy, because what you think is right and the other person thinks is right may be different. Of course, there's most things we agree on, like the murder is wrong. But even then, we have honor killings going on in small factions all over the world where it is technically quote unquote right to kill your daughter because you saw her kissing a boy. And so it gets, again, I keep saying things get so messy, but language is really messy. And so it behooves us in our careers to just not use these words at all. So you can use things that are similar. You could say correct or incorrect. You could say, I say, effective or not effective a lot, or, this is damaging versus not damaging, because that's looking at the results. If you say this kind of behavior is damaging, then you could say, look, here's evidence of how it's damaging these people, instead of just saying it's wrong. I can't prove that. I have to point to some authority figure, which we can do with something like law. Anyways, this kind of stuff fascinates me, but you probably muted this already. Argumentum ad populum, popular argument. There's not really a great translation for this. Argument to the people, using an appeal to popular assent. So you get people's enthusiasm going, and this is the sort of FOMO one where nobody wants to be left out of their group. We're a very in-group type of people, and so this is one part of this is bandwagoning. This everyone's doing it. And so this has been a really big thing that's come up with Trump's focus on his ratings. My favorites have been his tweets comparing his ratings to The Bachelor, the season finale of The Bachelor, which I don't even need to add any commentary onto that. That's an incredible connection he's made to our nation's, briefings on a global pandemic to The Bachelor. But his whole argument, I'm not going to read all of this, but his whole argument here is like the numbers are good, therefore what we're doing is right. Everybody's watching this, therefore this thing must be good. And obviously that logic doesn't match up. Just because a lot of people watch it, just because, your friends jump off a cliff, are you going to also? Same sort of logic. Patriotic appeal is part of this. So there's bandwagoning and there's patriotic appeal. And that's people assuming that a certain stance is correct because it's somehow patriotic. So, as Americans, those of us who are from the States, this is something that we're very familiar with. And actually, I would say people who are not in the States are also aware of this because it's a stereotype. This America first, be more American, that then is good. I think one of the kind of sleeper examples is the phrase real Americans buy American, which logically it breaks down. Does that mean that if you don't buy American-made things, you are not a real American? That doesn't really make sense either. The term real in front of things is used for being a real man or real woman. That's why I hate the term real women have curves. I'm like, what does that mean for women who do not have curves? Are they fake women? So we're used to this kind of language just proliferating itself throughout society. But there's something almost kind of like bullying in here of if you want to be American, which of course, logically, we're not going to process it this way. It's going to be more instantaneous. But if you're truly an American, if you're part of this nation and you want to belong, you should want to buy American stuff because you are an American. And we want to be a part of a group, in this case, our country. And that's where a lot of patriotism comes from. And lastly, the mean ones. Oh no. Oh no. Oh, it's going to make me go back to the beginning. What horror. What horror. Okay. There we go. The mean ones. The basic one, appeal to fear. I don't really think I need you to find that, but it's simply just using fear to persuade somebody. And it is one of the most powerful ones out there. So I mentioned when we went over rhetorical strategies that identification, using really positive language to make somebody feel more connected towards you or connected towards an idea, that's a really, really powerful thing. And that's what Hillary Clinton used in the 2016 election. And it won her a lot of support using really warm, inviting, unifying language. However, Trump was better because he used these appeal to fears, which get more at this primal part of us, that fight or flight type of attitude and feeling. So my favorite example in the entire world that I'll never stop using is this ad in the late 40s to promote abstinence. So if you're giving it up, you're going steady with Hitler. I love that there's the SS guards in their boots walking through. Obviously just supposed to make you align a certain kind of behavior with the thing that's the very worst, which is the end of the 40s. Hitler is the prime evil person. I think we would still say that he's the most evil person. So it's excellent. There's no reasons why you should be abstinent, just scaring you. I wish we still had those posters just because they're so funny. How this works with, let's say, political arguments. A lot of it has to do with placement. So this was obviously older. This is several years old. But saying 8 Syrians were just caught at the southern border trying to get into the U.S. Here we have some hasty generalizations. ISIS, maybe? I told you so. We need a big and beautiful wall. So bringing in this one situation, which could be anybody. Nothing was said about them being terrorists, but because unfortunately we've depicted people from the Middle East as being a quote unquote terrorist, people will automatically make that assumption. And then he suggests ISIS, and now you've had the scary situation, and he provides an answer for you. We could have a big, beautiful wall. So the only reason we should have a wall is because, look, this possibly scary thing, the way I've interpreted this as scary is going to happen. That's why we should have this wall. It's a horrible argument. All the wall arguments are horrible. Ad hominem is the most famously mean one. Personal attack, which targets the person instead of the issue, trying to make them really unlikable. This has been magically going on in these briefings where Trump just attacks reporters all the time for asking questions that he doesn't like. And so this is actually a clip that we looked at before, but we're going to look at the end of it.
Millions of units are ordered, and we're going to see what happens. We're going to be... let's see what happens. We have nothing to lose. And I agree with
it's gone.
The not yet approved drug.
Such a lovely question. Look, it may work and it may not work. And I agree with the doctor, what he said. May work, may not work. I feel good about it. Let's see what happens.
I'm just going to stop for a second. The word feel, we should never use the word feel ever when making an argument. Or if somebody's making an argument and says they just feel that way, instead of saying that they know and are giving evidence, that's bad. Not if, like, your girlfriend or boyfriend or whoever says, like, I feel sad that you treat me, you should listen to that. But when you're having an actual logical argument and someone's basing things off feelings, like, that doesn't hold up.
We have nothing to lose. You know the expression? What the hell do you have to lose? Okay?
So what do you say to Americans who are nearly 200? I'll spell out. Nearly 200 dead. What do you say to the Americans who are scared, though? I guess nearly 200 dead, 14,000 who are sick, millions, as you witness, who are scared right now. What do you say to Americans who are watching you right now who are scared?
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say. I think it's a very nasty question, and I think it's a very bad signal that you're putting out to the American people. The American people are looking for answers, and they're looking for hope. And you're doing sensationalism, and the same with NBC and Comcast. I don't call it Comcast. I call it Comcast. Let me just for whom you work. Let me just tell you something. That's really bad reporting. And you ought to get back to reporting instead of sensationalism. Let's see if it works. It might and it might not. I happen to feel good about it, but who knows? I've been right a lot. Let's see what happens, John.
Can I get back to the science and the logistics?
You're going to be ashamed of yourself.
The units that were...
Okay. I feel like I don't need to analyze that. I mean, we got that, right? Instead of answering the question, which ironically says people need hope now, which is kind of what that person was presenting. The reporter was just presenting numbers, and he went on to call him a terrible reporter. Appeal to force, argumentum ad baculum, or baculoma. I always say baculum, and that's not what it is. Like the school bully situation of just like, I will force you to do this thing. I don't want to watch this whole video, but this was earlier last week.
Retaliation. This if India doesn't lift its hold on the export of hydroxychloroquine, the anti-malaria drug used in the treatment of coronavirus patients. Trump, in his press briefing on coronavirus, has said that he's spoken to Prime Minister Narendra Modi about the supply of hydroxychloroquine, adding that if India doesn't allow the export, it may face retaliation. Meanwhile, sources have told India Today that for India, at this point, domestic consumption of hydroxychloroquine is the priority, and depending on the availability of stock of the drug exists.
Just to recap, Trump wants India to export this one drug that may end up helping patients with COVID-19, but we're not sure, and said that there will be retaliation if they don't. Indian Prime Minister is like, really our own country is our priority right now.
Existing orders will be cleared.
I spoke to him yesterday. We had a very good talk, and we'll see whether or not that's his. I would be surprised if he would, because India does very well with the United States. For many years, they've been taking advantage of the United States on trade. So I would be surprised if that were his decision. He'd have to tell me that. I spoke to him Sunday morning, called him, and I said, we'd appreciate your allowing our supply to come out. If he doesn't allow it to come out, that would be okay. But of course, there may be retaliation. Why wouldn't there be?
Okay. Genetic fallacy. So I call this one the racist fallacy. So claiming that an idea, product, or person must be untrustworthy because of its racial, geographic, or ethnic origin. Obviously, we've seen a massive rise with this, specifically with Chinese American or Chinese national or just Asian Americans in the U.S. because of the connection, the originating connection to coronavirus in China. And I mean, it's been called the Chinese virus by the president, which of course is not the accurate name. That's a very dangerous coupling to use. But this is a really fun one from a couple days ago. Ari Fleischer he's worked in the government and he's a bad dude. I don't like him. He deleted this because everybody was like, what the hell did you just do? So he posted a picture of these controllers for a PS4. And he said, another reason to distrust China. We bought my kids a PS4 and then got a second controller from Amazon. The controller was made in China, of course, and it doesn't work. It never worked. It's junk. So this is a beautiful genetic fallacy of connecting this shoddy game player with distrusting China in general. And this becomes really dangerous because we're looking at a product and saying, oh, this product doesn't work. This product is just as bad as all of the people in China and as China's, government and our relationship to China's government. So it's nasty and it's intoxicating for people who are racist. People who are racist and find comfort in the us and them narrative. This kind of stuff is like catnip, and it's so easy. It's easy for us to look at this and say, like, this is horrible. This is objectively horrible. But the truth is that it's not, because a lot of people just don't take a minute to say, wait a second, that logic doesn't make sense, and think about what you're saying and the impact that this has. You're in a minority of people who do that because you are now, emerging rhetoricians and you're critical thinkers and you're in the academy, you're in academia, you are the minority, and we have a responsibility to call out this kind of language, to call out so that other people can see it and say, oh yeah, that's right, because it is, again, so intoxicating for people who do not use critical thinking. We're almost done here, but reification, which is one that I added last year. It stems from Marx, but the idea of making a thing, making somebody into a thing. So objects are subjects, subjects are objects. So for example, this was from, I think, a year and a half ago. And I'm just going to read this through and think about sort of what happens in wartime rhetoric of how you can dehumanize a people, let's say during the Holocaust, calling Jews an infestation or likening them to rats. The more that you strip away that humanity, the language of humanity, the easier it becomes to then kill those people, that you don't even associate what you're doing with a human being, which is exactly what happened for the people who said they were the Nazis, that said they were just following orders. Whether we believe that or not, the entire German people and people in Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, Slovakia, Poland were going through the same, they had the same kind of propaganda that was shoved down their throats. And so it was a lot easier for them to distance themselves from others if you are just using language to do so. So yes, this was from, I forget what speech this was from, but I guess this was during the 2016 election. Without looking at the various polling data, it is obvious to anyone, so we have a argumentum ad populum, that the hatred is beyond comprehension. Where this hatred comes from and why we will have to determine. Until we are able to determine and understand this problem and the dangerous threat it poses, our country cannot be victims of horrendous attacks by people that believe only in jihad and have no sense of reason or respect for human life if I win the election for president. So a lot of dangerous stuff happening in here. One is the our country, the first area that I highlighted. Saying that something is yours, it automatically creates an us and them. Secondly, using that instead of who. It could be horrendous attacks by people who believe, but that's giving them humanity. By saying that, it's taking that little bit of humanity away. Then saying that they believe only in jihad, that's not even a very human thing to have only one thing in you, only one belief system. It's really reductive of just how complex a human being is. And of course, this last part, no sense of reason or respect for human life. That's one of the classic dog whistles of a genetic fallacy of saying this person is not like us. People call this the "you're not like us" fallacy also. It kind of goes into the same area of taking away the one thing that sort of makes us different from animals, which is our reason in our moral systems. And by taking that away, you have created an object out of the subject. Very dangerous. Oh, here it is. They're not like us, also called the association fallacy. So when you are just saying, oh, these people are not like us, these people don't think like us. I think in my first year of teaching, I had the worst line that I've ever read. It wasn't on my paper. It was on another professor's student's paper, where they were talking about Hiroshima and said that the reason Hiroshima shouldn't be something that we are sad about or that we feel guilty about as Americans, because the Japanese people they don't care about life or death in the same way as Americans. And it was just one of the worst, most degrading racist comments that I've seen from a student. They didn't pass that paper. Anyways, to lighten it up a little bit, this has been a pretty common phrase, I'd say, by my friends, or I think I've had at least 2 friends who were swiping on whatever, dating app they were on, and the minute that they see somebody in their red "Make America Great Again" hat, they're like, oh, forget that, which I'm with them personally, but I realize that actually is totally the association fallacy, that we don't know anything about that person, but it also just speaks to just how politics have become larger than life in our society. And we will end with this very last fallacy called the tukoke, which is you do it too, accusing the other side of wrongdoing, which makes your argument safe. So if you are trying to get your friend to stop drinking and they said, well, you had 3 drinks last night, that would be a tukoke. Or, you shouldn't skip class anymore. Well, you skipped your class this morning. So we're all guilty of this one, but it's a shield to keep yourself clean from that same kind of association. So those are not all of the fallacies. Those are all of the ones that are prominent, it seems. And I know that was a lot, but our next assignment is completely based off of these fallacies, which is why we've taken 2 days to meticulously go through each one and to hopefully write them down so that you have your own understandable list, because we're going to be moving into our American Board Chinese and start looking at the way that some of these fallacies work into everyday life as we this sounds terrible, others, as we use language to create an other out of people besides ourselves. All right. Peace out.